Alex, what are the WhatsApp like? Are there like a lot of emojis?
There's a lot of emojis.
Are there?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Mainly the brain explosion one.
Like
a brain explosion, that's a good one.
Brain explosion. Yeah. Wait, how many times are there, like, how many brain explosions were there on that WhatsApp?
I've had a lot of vomit emojis as well. That's one that's come up a lot, of just the idea of whatever person taking over.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I honestly think the problem is 12 years, they all hate each other. They've all got personal reasons to hate each other.
Yeah.
And when you're at the start of a government, generally you might not like someone, but you haven't really got lots of reasons to hate people viscerally. And these lot just hate each other.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I thought that was really good.
Dave, shall we try this again?
I think we'd better, yes.
So, a little over 24 hours ago, we sat down and actually taped what we thought was a fantastic episode with Catherine Griffiths, a Bloomberg editor on our finance team, and UK government reporter Alex Wickham.
We picked over the potential for Liz Truss's future, the outlook of our promises for the city. We all placed bets on when Liz Truss would resign.
Should we take bets on when she goes? I've already lost a bet. I have a bet, Dave. I've probably lost it.
The lettuce is winning, right?
Alex, when do you think she goes?
I think this week. Today or
before Sunday, before Saturday.
Yeah, before Saturday would be my bet. But
I think today.
You think today?
Dave?
Today.
One more day. Freaky Friday.
For the podcast. Hang on one more day so we get this podcast out.
Yes, please, Liz.
She's listening, I know, so it'll be fun.
But Liz Truss did not hang on one more day. We couldn't get the episode out because Truss delivered her final goodbye.
That's right. She beat us to it. And although we did all know it was coming at some point, we weren't sure how quickly, because the point Alex made yesterday in the conversation, what is still true now, is that there is actually no obvious or clear successor at this point.
So that's it. We're back with even more to unpack, and with the hopes that no major bombshells will be dropped before this podcast is published.
Yeah, so our editor better get moving, get it out.
I'm Francine Lacqua in the London studio.
And I'm David Merritt, back from Washington, not quite in the London studio.
Yeah, but you made it back in time. This is In the City, Bloomberg's podcast, connecting you to the stories and the voices at the heart of the City of London.
And this week, what is going on in Westminster? That's all anyone is talking about. And do any of the Tory MPs raising their hand to be the next Prime Minister really excite the City of London?
So with us again, Catherine Griffiths, a Bloomberg editor on our finance team, and the winner of yesterday's bet on the timing of Liz Truss's departure. Catherine, you probably regret we didn't have a very expensive or not so expensive bottle of wine on this bet.
I definitely regret that.
And in for Alex Wickham, who's knee-deep in writing about all of the drama, is another brilliant reporter from our government team, Ellen Milligan. We know the rules now of how the voting goes. I mean, they're trying to be pragmatists instead of, the big ideology maybe that we've seen in the past from the Tory party, and they want to get this done fast.
There were two really key details in the rules that were announced. One, the candidates have to get at least 100 MPs backing them. That means there's only a maximum of 3 people who can enter the race. And it also means that they have got a long way to go until Monday, 2 p.m, when votes close, to garner that support. And really that means that the big beasts, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, who have gone through this leadership race again, all 3 of them have got more than 100 MP votes in previous leadership elections. They're probably going to be the most likely ones to go through. The other thing which is really unusual is that on Monday they're going to do an indicative vote where MPs can vote from those 3 who they want to win. Now that isn't binding, but it's indicative of what MPs want. And I think that is to bounce whoever becomes second, maybe third in that vote into dropping out and not letting the race go in any longer, not letting it go to the membership, and making sure that we have a Prime Minister on Monday.
It's quite remarkable, isn't it? Because we all went through this, didn't we? All summer, weeks and weeks and weeks of it, being told this is the process that we need to identify the right leader. And turns out we can just do it in 3 days. I mean, it just kind of doesn't it undermine all of the rules that we were told were, absolutely necessary. The Conservative Party, they just sort of make it up as they go along, don't they?
They do. And I mean, it's designed like this to kind of give stability to the Conservative Party, but also the country as quickly as possible, not have this long, drawn-out period. If it doesn't go to the membership, only Conservative MPs are going to decide who our next Prime Minister is.
I mean, this happened in the Labour Party, didn't it, as well? These rules of having the members choose, you can sometimes end up with somebody who doesn't work out right. That's the problem.
It depends who you ask. I mean, the membership, if you look at those three I mentioned, Penny Mordaunt, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, the membership still love Boris Johnson. I think if it does go to membership, the indicative vote of the MPs will actually have a different result to what the membership will.
So, Dave, I had this brilliant conversation with Tory MP Carl McCartney. He's backing Boris Johnson. He's also been on the 1922 committee for all but 2 days. So this is what he said about Boris Johnson.
Ultimately, he's the best electoral asset that the Conservative Party has. And for the past 3-4 months, all I've ever had from my constituents in my marginal seat in Lincoln is that they want to see Boris back. And that's whether I'm visiting businesses and speaking to business people, whether that's constituents who I meet shopping in the various different supermarkets or even filling up my car. But not one person has come to me and said, we're really pleased that you got rid of Boris Johnson.
Ellen, Boris Johnson, really? He can really be back?
You know what? Last night, I didn't think he could get enough MP support to be put on the ballot, but he's now garnered just under the amount of support that Rishi Sunak has. Ben Wallace has just announced that he's leaning towards Boris Johnson and that he's definitely not running. He's quite a big force. He's very respected in the party, and it feels like it could happen. The thing with Boris is he is an electoral powerhouse. I mean, he got the biggest 80-seat majority in a generation in 2019, and people still think he holds that magic, even though the polls were declining against him when he was leaving office. But also, Liz Truss's handling of the economy, I think, can make people look back and think, all he did was really party in the pandemic sometimes. It kind of relatively has almost made him into this martyr figure among some people and some Conservatives. But he's
I mean, I have so many questions.
But he's toxic. He's toxic for the party. He's probably their most divisive option to pick in terms of being able to unify the party. We've had MPs saying that they would resign as an MP if he was chosen and cause a by-election. I mean, those are really strong words. And he's got this privileges committee into whether he lied to Parliament over the Partygate scandal. If he's found guilty and if he's suspended for more than 10 parliamentary days, if there is a vote and that it could trigger a by-election for him, I mean, it could be chaos, a continuation of chaos if he's elected.
And there's so many people, Dave, that say he's just not the antidote to this chaos within Parliament. Catherine, how would business interpret this? I mean, if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister on Monday, what does the city think?
I think the city probably thinks, first of all, it's good to have a Prime Minister who is there for hopefully a while. But Boris Johnson is a funny character for the city because on the one hand, he's been backed by some fairly rich city people who hoped he would bring about lots of Brexit dividend reforms, but he didn't actually do it. And someone made a really interesting point to me. When you look back through the many, many thousands of words Boris Johnson wrote as a journalist, he hardly ever talked about markets or the economy. He's basically not that interested in all of that side of things. So I think that the city and business more generally would be probably undoubtedly more pleased to see Boris Johnson as Prime Minister than Liz Truss, although there is certainly a contingent that was on Liz Truss's side and was hoping that she would bring about the things they wanted. But I think the city will be mainly looking for who is the Chancellor. Is it Jeremy Hunt or is it someone else?
Do you think there's a groundswell of support for Rishi Sunak, or will there be a huge amount of relief if finally, I mean, we've had the Liz interlude and the chaos that provoked, but if finally they get Rishi Sunak in 10 Downing Street, will the city actually breathe a huge sigh of relief?
I think the city will, because he has certainly in his own campaign to become the leader. Of course, he was the voice of caution, wasn't he? And obviously he's now kind of garnered by this sense that he was right all along type thing. And I think people who have followed his policies quite closely are of the view he's quite cautious, that yes, sort of counterintuitively really, despite the fact that he's worked for Goldman Sachs and hedge funds, that he was very keen to balance the books and be very, very cautious. But there will be people out there who think that if he comes back, he will kind of scupper the more dramatic, bold attempts to sort of make the UK's rules, properly suit the UK. He's come to be seen as a sort of stick in the mud to all of those plans, he and John Glenn, who used to be the city minister. So there'll be some people out there who are a bit worried about that.
Ellen, if we oversimplify, is this really a choice for the party? On the one hand, if they elect Boris Johnson, there's a chance that he can win them the next general election in 2 years. But on the other hand, if they elect someone else, Penny Mordaunt or Rishi Sunak, then they have almost a technocratic government. They could keep the Chancellor. And so the markets will, have a sigh of relief.
There's two big questions that MPs are asking themselves when they're considering who to back. One, who can win them the next election or give them the best chance to, considering they're trailing so disastrously far behind in the polls. And two, who can unify the party so that the Conservative Party isn't completely destroyed from the inside. Boris Johnson, I think a lot of people say he's probably gives them the best chance electorally. Although there's so many things that Labour can attack him on that they started to towards the end of his tenure. But he's probably the worst in terms of being able to unify the party. Rishi Sunak, Truss's backers still really don't like Rishi Sunak. There was all those blue on blue attacks, the nastiness over the summer that still kind of play against him. And then Penny Mordaunt is able to get a lot of support from different factions in the party, but a lot of people questioned whether she's had enough experience, whether she's impressed people enough when she has been in ministerial positions. So those are the two big questions. In fact, Catherine, it was interesting what you were saying about Jeremy Hunt earlier, because I think he could hold the key to who gets in, because I think people will want to, maybe not Boris Johnson, seeing as they ran against each other for the leadership in 2019, but I think Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak will be fighting to have a joint ticket with Jeremy Hunt. He's managed to calm the market since he's come in. The argument will be we need a degree of stability in the Treasury so that the October 31st fiscal statement can go ahead, for example. He's done a good job so far at calming things down, and I think whoever he backs could hold the key.
Yeah, I just think those two questions really are just so important, Ellen. And on the second one, though, I guess my thought is, with all of them, with all of the backstabbing and the infighting that we've seen, the vitriol being poured around, this is a party at each other's throats. It doesn't feel like any of those people are going to be able to calm down the party enough to hold a government together to get to that point to answer the first question, which is whether or not they can win an election. Is this kind of a party actually in terminal decline at the moment, and they just need to go into opposition?
I talked to some MPs who say, you know what, we're just going to have to accept that this time we might have to go with our second or our third choice, and we just have to grin and bear it. And then I talked to others who say, that they might resign from the parliamentary party if certain people are in.
Catherine, we also spoke to Vince Cable, and he was talking about how Boris Johnson is still a very decisive but divisive figure, that because of his conduct issues.
Well, I would worry about the consequences. So for several reasons. I mean, he's a very divisive figure in the country, and I would imagine within the Tory party, though I'm not a Conservative myself. I think we need to remember that only a few months ago, a majority of his parliamentary colleagues threw him out as unsuited to lead the country.
Again, when you talk about the City of London, are they just fed up with the Tories because they say, look, they're putting once again party before country? And what does that mean for how business friendly they think Labour is?
Yeah, they really are fed up with the Tories. What's been quite striking in the last few weeks is when you talk to really senior people inside big financial institutions, they tend to be quite measured, even if they're speaking off the record. They don't really like talking about politics a great deal, and certainly not about individuals. But there has been an absolute fury amongst some of these very senior bankers and people in other firms. They think that in other walks of life, these people would have had to be held accountable. They would have been sacked much more quickly. It's a real absolute sort of white hot fury that you see in their faces. And I haven't really seen it before in all my years of reporting.
Talking about the white hot fury of bankers is remarkable. And is there anything that the government can do to assuage that? I mean, what are the main measures that the next administration need to put in place to steady the ship and reassure the City of London that things are going to get better?
They absolutely want stability and clear plans. They know the economic reality is tough. And actually, in some ways, I think they're of the view that a lot of these difficult things were coming down the path anyway. Higher interest rates, meaning higher mortgage costs for customers. But, the Tory party, in a sort of act of self-sabotage, has really sort of owned those problems in a way that they might not have to have done. But in terms of policy, they really do want stability and fiscal prudence, because they think that might mean that the Bank of England does not, in fact, have to raise rates by quite as much as it would otherwise have to do. And that will have a really material impact on people who have mortgages, people who have loans, and the wider economy. And then I think they do want a sort of sensible, thought-out set of ideas for how, in fact, there can be investment in this country. They're obviously extremely keen to be part of that story. They just want to see stability so they can get on with it.
But Catherine, where does this stability come from? So again, it's the same party, but you saw Liz Truss, who lasted 44 days with radical economic plans, frankly. So if you're looking at the policies, and we don't know them because they don't have time to campaign, between Penny Mordaunt, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, how different are they?
I think they have a sense of what Rishi Sunak would be like. They've seen, obviously, Boris Johnson in action, and I think they probably think that can be navigated. I think they honestly have no idea what Penny Mordaunt would be like whatsoever. But increasingly, when you do speak to business and the city, they say they're not really bothering with any of the Tories. They are engaging with the Labour Party. They are talking to Rachel Reeves. They are pretty encouraged by Keir Starmer. And something I was really struck by, I had a conversation with someone who works at a big private equity firm, and they made exactly this point, that they were only engaging with the Labour Party at the moment. And I said, well, but what if Starmer comes in and they do a wealth tax, or they hike up the inheritance tax? What actually do you think about that? And they said, the view inside their firm, which is made up of lots of American people, lots of people from the continent, was that it's okay, as long as it's not really egregious, not really sort of outside the norms of what they think are acceptable, they would prefer to see a Labour government.
That's a pragmatic bunch, aren't they, really? They sort of work with what they...
A pragmatic bunch. And this firm in particular, they're holding back on investment in the UK until they know what the hell's going on. So, for the UK's growth, that's absolutely terrible.
The really tricky thing that the Tories have at the moment is Jeremy Hunt has been able to calm markets because he's rode back on those tax cuts, which would have required a lot of borrowing. And spending cuts are now on the cards. And that calms markets because it means less borrowing, but it's politically really tricky for them. So getting that balance right between continuing to calm the markets and can't, they still need to cut, they have some way to go to really calm them more, but also not politically damaging themselves so much that they're making spending cuts to the NHS and to police and these things, which, to be honest, might be required if they want to fill that hole that they really need to. And that balance, I think, is going to be really, really hard to strike on October 31st, if indeed it still happens at the end of the month.
If it happens. So we've had 44 days, frankly, of chaos on the markets. Is there a belief, Catherine, that the, extreme right, extreme left on both parties is now shaken out because they do have to work in the parameter of the markets?
Yes, I think that's one sort of slight positive, perhaps, that there's a perception that on the left, we've gone through a period when the kind of Corbynites were in the ascendant, and that absolutely horrified business in the city. But actually, also on the right, I think there's a lot of sort of views in mainstream finance that they thought the voices that people like Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were listening to were extremely unhelpful for the kind of UK's long-term prospects, that they had sort of fairly niche ideas about what they claimed Brexit meant, but didn't necessarily actually serve the wider interests of the country, to do with sort of tax cuts for non-doms and all sorts of libertarian smaller state ideas. So I do think that in mainstream finance, they think that if those people can be cut out as a result of all of this political chaos, that's a good thing.
Ellen, you have to indulge me because I know we're all obsessed with politics and the economy and markets, but I'm also obsessed with WhatsApp groups of the Conservative Party. They have emojis. I mean, do we know what Alex Wickham was telling us yesterday, that they would kind of send names to each other of who could run or who could be chancellor, and there were a lot of like exploding brain emojis and a lot of vomit emojis.
Vomit, right?
I have one unnamed MP who pretty much only communicates with me by emojis. There's very colourful language as well in Conservative Party WhatsApp groups, and there's a lot of exploding heads. I had an ex-minister send me an exploding head after she resigned. No one saw it coming that quickly. And
I
hope you're saving them, Ellen. We should make a kind of, make a
Dave,
book.
this is how I communicate with Dave, but I'm a journalist, so he's like, what,
Just
you can't
loads
write
of-
in
loads of,
sentences? You just send emojis?
you know those word clouds that polling companies have been doing? They should do that with purely emojis and see
with
which
a big
one.
vomit one at the middle.
Welcome to the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's In the City. We'll be back next week.
But in the meantime, if you like our show, please head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and rate, review and subscribe.
Also, sign up now for our newsletter, The Readout with Allegra Stratton, on Bloomberg.com/newsletters, or check out the show notes for a link.
And you know what else you should now sign up for? Our new daily newsletter, Money Distilled, where Bloomberg UK's John Stepek explains what market moves mean for your money.
This episode was hosted by me, Francine Lacqua.
And me, David Merritt.
It was produced by Summer Sadi. Special thanks to Catherine Griffiths, Ellen Milligan, and Alex Wickham.